Hey, for this week's essay, we're going to talk about how leadership shouldn't require people to guess. And we'll talk about creating a leadership user guide. Now, I mean, you may think you're a wonderful person to work with. Um, you know what you're thinking about, you know your plans, your aspirations, you know your quirks, you know your idiosyncrasies, you know what's going on in your mind. And, you think you're pretty easy to work with. The problem is nobody else knows what's going on in your head. Now, you're with yourself all day, every day, but most other people are not. And they're left kind of guessing, trying to figure out what it is that you want them to do. And, leading by whim is not really a good way to go about it. So, that's where we'll talk about the user guide in a second. But just think a little bit about, like, do you really need one of these? What might be going on in your world? Well, here's a symptom. If people have to keep interpreting what you say, you might need this. In other words, you know that expectations get translated differently depending upon the work group or the person or what's going on in their mind, things like that. Now, effective leader will communicate differently to different audiences. But if you're not doing that, or you're just saying something and it's spray and pray, people are gonna interpret it in their own way. Well, that's not so great, because if people have to interpret you differently and work it out amongst themselves, the trust gets strained. People are less liable to think, or less likely to think, what you're saying is truthful, or maybe you don't even know what you're talking about, which is not in a position you want to be in if you're leading folks. So another symptom is, like, the questions are multiplying. Like, if you're really bogged down by why do people keep asking all these same questions and all that, it's because you're not being clear enough. Um, Also, if work slows down, I mean, people generally want to do good work, and so they're being a little bit more careful. And so the work will slow down because they're being more deliberate and all that. Now, if you're uh, putting the nose to the grindstone and telling them we got to speed this up, then you're going to start seeing more errors and all that, because they're just going to go, well, all right, this is going to be a bummer, but whatever. And so these are some symptoms that if people have to interpret the leader, maybe the leader is not quite as clear as they think they have been. So, in the leadership drift world, this would be a communications breakdown. Or essentially, the intentions are not instructions. Just because you intend something doesn't mean that it's an instruction for somebody. Just because you have painted a great vision, but you haven't told people how to get there, you can't leave all this stuff up to interpretation. I mean, maybe if you're a fiction writer or you're a storyteller, but even a storyteller has the directions to help people kind of figure out to get where the author has intended. So you've got to be much clearer about your instructions and your intentions and how it is to work together. And so that's where it brings sort of the principle that effective leadership doesn't require people to guess. Stop quizzing everybody. Stop saying, well, you should know. Stop saying, well, we've done this 1,000 times. Well, maybe you have come up with 900 different answers of those 1,000 times. So cut your people some slack and start thinking about yourself. And are people having to guess about what it is that you want to have accomplished? So a great way of preventing some of this guessing is by creating a leadership user guide. Now, this doesn't have to be as advanced as some sort of technical manual. We're not flying an airplane here from your leadership standpoint. I think if you are overly simplistic and it's IKEA instructions, pictures only, that might be okay, depending upon your audience. It's probably a good litmus test. But, all you really need is a page. And, it's a page of answers to questions that most people would want to know. And so partly you do a little pre-work and ask things like, what do you consistently value? How do you actually make decisions? What behaviors earn your trust? What behaviors cause unnecessary friction? What strengths can others depend on? In other words, you have this strength and everybody knows it and people are relying on it. Where are you still growing? What could you improve that you're aware of, that maybe other people are aware of too, but are afraid to talk to you about it or help you with it? And also, what are things that people might bleh. Clearly, what are some things that people might misunderstand about you that you just didn't communicate quickly enough? I mean, so a lot of times we interpret quiet as being, oh, they must be very intelligent and sage and just kind of taking all of this in. They might just have a real tough time following what's going on, so they're quiet, or they might, blunt ass first idea out, all that kind of stuff, because they grew up with a huge family, and if you didn't reach for the pasta bowl first, you were got smaller servings, and so they're aware of that, and they're kind of working on that in different surroundings, whatever it may be. These are your own kind of quirks and idiosyncrasies, what it's like to work with you. You don't have to give your life story, you just have to fit something on a page that gives people a fighting chance. uh, it doesn't hurt to let people know what kind of leader you are trying to become. If you are opening up and being vulnerable, and I'm not saying every day of the week, but if you are vulnerable and saying, "Yeah, this is something I'm trying to work on. I'm not as forceful in these situations, or I'm too quiet in these situations, or I don't give people a chance to air their ideas or their grievances. It's my way or the highway, and I know that's wrong, and I've got to figure it out more." If you're upfront about that, one, people will be understanding when you goof, and they'll give you some grace. But you've got to allow for grace to be. You got to give room for it. So brass tacks. What's really in a user's guide here, or leadership user guide? Just things that you want people to know about you, that it would be good. So I think you do a little self-reflection. That's where the power of the exercise really is if you can put this together, you're going to know yourself more than when you started. So, for example, what are your leadership values? What do you believe? How do you think? Like, have you ever thought about how you think? Think about it. What are your strengths? We talked about that a little bit. How might people misread you? There's two parts here that I think should certainly be in there. What can others expect from you, and what do you expect from them? Like, I have a piece of in mind where it's like, I do tend to tinker and things like that. So I would expect you to ask me, so what and who cares? Because if I can't answer so what and who cares, you're not going to. So, I need to be able to answer those questions. But at the same token, what I expect from you, not only asking so what and who cares, but, have some humor. Call BS BS. Don't be afraid to do that. And people can expect from me is I'm going to be, more caring, more careful, deliberate, listen to that. But I also have candor. So I'd rather you just say it. It doesn't have to be pretty. Let's get it out there and figure it out, and then we'll work through it. Another thing that people tend to forget about, and this should be across the board, is what's your communication preference? If you hate the phone, don't say, "Give me a call," right? If text is an interruption to you, and you have your email summarized or something like that, and maybe email is better for you, maybe you get information by reading it, maybe if it's important, come talk to me. So it's a face-to-face conversation, and that's when it's really important. I mean, for years I had the interpretation that if it's important, I'm going to put it in writing, and I got very frustrated that a bunch of my associates and such were not doing what I said in writing, and they, ever to the T, every one of them said, "If it's important, talk to me. If it's in writing, I ignore it." Now that's completely different to how I think, but wouldn't it be nice to know if that's how your team thinks? And how successful do you think I would be if I had to train everybody on that team to do and think exactly the way that I do? That would have been horrible. So probably the same in your scenario. So share your communication preferences. Share what concerns you. What are you worried about? This doesn't have to be therapy on the page there, but what is it that you are sort of battling against? What are the demons, real or imagined, or what's the enemy? Not to put it in that strict term, but what is the nemesis to or the villain to your journey as a leader? What are you trying to battle against? It could be procrastination. It could be an evil empire company that you're against. You're biggest competitor or something like that, whatever it may be. But what are you concerned about? What gives you concern? Maybe you don't like a culture of a bunch of liars and backstabbers, and that might give you some concern if that's a culture that you're in, and you go in and start saying that. You're going to make some waves. So, what concerns you? And then finally, what gives you hope? What is it that, hey, based on your leadership philosophy and how you feel about things, this is why you're feeling pretty good about the world. And if you're not hopeful or optimistic, or at the very least pragmatic, you've got to think about your role as a leader, because a leader needs to be all of those things. You've got to be realistic. You've got to be pragmatic, but a little optimism wouldn't hurt. And so, what are you hopeful for and about? And so, bottom line, just put all this on a sheet of paper, or little boxes on a paper, or whatever it is, and just keep it human. And now the value in this not only was you putting it together, because if you put it together, wow, you know yourself a little bit better. But can you imagine having these conversations with important people in your organization? Hey, here's what it's like to work with me. Just thought you might want to know. Those conversations that you're either having in a one-on-one, or even if it's just over at a lunch or something like that. One, you're going to stand out being unique and thoughtful and caring. But two, now you've got some people that are helping to hold you accountable in a positive way. And so I think that's a great direction to go. So if you need any help on that, of course, you can give me a shout at Karl Bimshas Consulting. But this is a thing that you can work on your own. So how you get started, just give yourself an hour, think about it, answer some of those questions, and start sharing how you want to lead with the people who you are leading. So, 3 questions to sort of reflect on. Do you really need this? Well, what are people guessing about? What in your organization are you hearing that people are guessing about because they haven't been told, or it hasn't been clear to them? What is it that they consistently misunderstand? If you're looking at your team or the people that you're leading, what are you having to re-explain several times because they're consistently just not understanding what's going on? And what have you assumed was obvious? Like, it's obvious to you, but you might be the only one who it's obvious to, in which case it's not particularly helpful. So what have you assumed is obvious? So if you can answer those 3 questions, you'll probably have good fodder for putting together a leadership user guide, which will help everyone who is working with you. Hope that helps. Looking forward to talking to you next week. In the meantime, keep advancing confidently in the direction of your dreams and help others along the way.